Welcome to On Brand 2020, in this session on the overdue arrival of creative automation. My name is Andrew Hally. I'm coming at you from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Bynder. I've been in technology marketing for 20 years or so, the better part of that actually working for marketing technology vendors. So I'm really excited to share some thoughts with you about the spread of automation across the marketing function. You know, some of the pressure we have in marketing today stems from what I see as an incomplete, unbalanced state of automation. But I think the time is right to restore that balance by bringing some automation further upstream into the creative process. Let me start by turning back the clock a bit and kind of reviewing how we got here. The state of marketing before digital media had a couple of really salient characteristics. First of all, a very limited number of channels. Hard to imagine, but back in the day there were 3 broadcast networks, and that was about it. We had newspapers, we had magazines, a much smaller number of channels to touch consumers through. The pace was much more deliberate, as we would say. Weeks and months were sufficient to execute campaigns for these offline channels. So the creative work really did focus on creating the big idea rather than the production of volume. A third key characteristic was a lack of tracking and measurement, perhaps best captured by this well-known quote from a retailer back in the 1870s, John Wanamaker, lamenting that he knew half his money was wasted, he just didn't know what half. So pre-digital media, we had fewer channels. These channels operated at a much slower pace, and they weren't measurable, and we couldn't track them. And of course, as we all know, the internet happened. Sometimes it's so pervasive today, it's hard to recall just how explosive the growth of the internet was, but the yellow line there really kind of captures it. Consumers flocked to all the great new things that we could do online, and of course, marketers followed the eyeballs. Not only was the audience there, but unlike traditional media, digital media was measurable, trackable, and highly targetable. So the volume exploded as marketers adopted the internet. One, just the number of channels that we had available to us really exploded. And then within each channel, again, because the media is so targetable, we could get ever more precisely targeted on customers and created more campaigns to do just that. So the volume of campaigns just exploded, whether it's paid search, display, email isn't even shown here. You can see the explosive use of video, a real explosion in volume. In addition to volume, the pace really accelerated. So we went from a world where executing campaigns from newspapers and other offline media could take weeks or days, to the first real digital media that was embraced wholly, email. Campaigns could be executed as fast as hours. And then fast forward to today, when online ad auctions happen in milliseconds. I mean, that literally is beyond human speed. So with digital media, we saw an explosion in volume and an incredible quickening of the pace. So much so that humans really couldn't even keep up. And so as a result, we automated campaign execution. What this graph shows is the growth in vendors meeting this need for automated campaign execution. And you can see, we could have chosen something else to illustrate this growth, probably the amount of investment that went into it, the number of jobs, titles available, and marketing operations and things like that. But this one captures it pretty well, I think. So a 52-fold growth in the amount of companies helping to automate campaign execution. But a crucial point is, well, downstream execution was getting automated. The upstream creative process needed to feed those campaigns saw very little investment. You may be familiar with this MarTech map. This is the 8,000, that was the endpoint of that graph on the previous slide. A subset of that little island there on the left side represent companies that were trying to speed and make more agile the content production part. Now that's So it's very little investment. That's not to say that some great things haven't happened. The advancement of tools within, say, Adobe Creative Cloud have been amazing. There's some amazing technology built in today that you could hardly have dreamed about a decade ago. The workflow, the automating the process of approval has really come of age and is pretty ubiquitous. And then better storage management and reuse of digital assets is also pretty common now through DAM software. So it's not that things stood still here, but these advances really didn't change the fundamental fact that the creative process has largely remained linear and manual, characterized by very talented, skilled individuals creating assets one at a time in largely a linear waterfall process. So the key point here is that this mismatch between the trickle of assets that the still largely manual creative process can create is a huge mismatch to the torrent of assets needed by a highly automated digital marketing execution. And this creative output gap, this content crunch, if you will, is really one of the contributing factors for marketing being kind of out of balance these days. Now, the symptoms of this lack of balance are all around us. Within marketing organizations, the pressure to meet this exploding demand for digital assets it comes down to the creative team, obviously. So there's an enormous amount of pressure to try and keep up. And just this cranking of asset production by the creative teams has sucked some of the oxygen out of the room and sucked time away from the more value-added work that these talented individuals could be doing around really creating strong brand concepts, storytelling, the sorts of things that really build strong, powerful brands. So that's one thing that we've seen. Similarly, with all this pressure to meet the exploding demand for assets, we've seen huge growth in the stock photography industry. Promotion has often become just very product centric, very just like, here's the product, that's it. And as a result, I think this is a big contributing factor to what people call digital sameness, that the sea of just white noise that sometimes digital marketing can seem to be. Most importantly, perhaps, though, is that consumers have come to resent a lot of modern marketing. Now, everyone's got a story, right? My particular bugbear is the Hawaiian shirt ad that's been following me around the internet for 5 years or more. Back in the winter, 5-6 years ago, there was a beach party, so I had to buy a Hawaiian shirt, and ever since, these ads have been plaguing me. Going to that party has been one of my life's biggest regrets. Personalized product promotions like that don't have strong creative, that lack any sort of a brand story. This has become surveillance marketing, a term from Bob Hoffman that I really like. And surveillance marketing is turning consumers off. Here's a survey that I think is interesting that shows this. 75% of the consumers surveyed found most forms of personalization at least somewhat creepy. Now, there's lots of other surveys that kind of capture this, and in fact, this was from 2018, so it's probably more than 75% now. But what I like about this survey, or maybe what I dislike about this survey, is they also asked brands themselves, and 40% of brands agreed that what they were doing was creepy. I find that almost shocking. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised then, right, that this consumer resentment is being codified into law. In some cases, the marketing is bad enough, the consumer pushback is strong enough, and the industry response weak enough that governments have been forced to get involved. These, first came GDPR, then we have the CCPA here in the States. So this consumer resentment has hardened into a legislative agenda. Perhaps more surprising, though, is that this overinvestment in the automation of campaign execution is starting to hurt actual marketing ROI. So if you go back to Economics 101, you may recall that increasing marginal investment yields decreasing returns. So, as you get up the curve, it gets harder and harder to squeeze out additional ROI from additional investment. And when it comes to automation of campaign execution, we're a long ways up that curve. So every little bit more that we spend yields less and less results. Costs rise as we segment more deeply. Audience sizes shrink as the cells get smaller. So as a result, incremental ROI shrinks. And it's not just a theoretical thing. Gartner predicts that by 2025, up to 80% of marketers may abandon their personalization efforts, in large part because of the difficulty in generating ROI. It's not like we don't know better, though, right? It's not like creative ever stopped being a prime driver of marketing results. I really like this Nielsen survey that you see here that studied what drove ad performance. And you can see that targeting, recency, reach, some of these new things that can be data-driven have an enormous impact on results. But look at the biggest factor. It's creative, right? Creative drives marketing results. I'm reminded by this of that joke about the drunk who looks for his car keys underneath the streetlight. Not because that's where he thinks he lost them, but simply because that's where there was some light to search. Similarly, some marketers keep investing in more and more data-driven performance marketing, not because that's where they think the keys to great performance are, but simply because that's where they've got the light. That's where they have data with which to see and prove real attribution. So hopefully that kind of explains, I think, kind of the challenge of this incomplete marketing automation, if you will. Fortunately, though, I think it's a very solvable problem if we reframe the content crunch and think about it differently. And the key is that we don't, and you'll find this is not some brilliant insight. This is pretty common sense. We don't need unique creative assets for every touch that we have. Each segment, each cell doesn't need a newly bespoke, spun up piece of brilliance. Rather, 95% of the assets in this huge need for assets, 95% of them are 95% the same. Well, and they differ by several axes, if you will, that are consistent. So, for example, one is localization. A lot of the demand for all these new creative assets comes from the need to localize and the ability to localize campaigns according to area or language. The basic ad, the basic creative is the same. What changes is the localized language, obviously. Another example would be ad size and ad format. The creative doesn't change, but what changes is the exact dimensions of the ad. Banner versus column, what have you. Again, lots of variation comes from the need to meet the different ad sizes and formats available to us. Final example another dimension is testing. We all know that to really be successful with digital marketing, you need to be able to test different versions, see which ones perform best. And so the creative team has to create not just campaigns, but versions of assets to be able to test against each other. And again, they're pretty much the same. They just differ in maybe color, layout, things like that. So again, a lot of the assets that we have, a lot of the need for these assets are driven by these different dimensions of variability. So reframing the content crunch means, starting from this understanding that a lot of the explosion in demand comes from variations on core assets. And these variations are simple, they're repetitive, and they're highly constrained. And that being the case, we can solve the content crunch by handing off some of the work and by automating some of the work. Let me explain each of these in turn. So when it comes to distributing asset creation, sharing the burden, if you will, it works this way. So, on the left up front, creative design, of course, it starts with the creative team. But instead of designing, finished assets that work downstream, the creative team is designing templates. These templates can then be shared with execution teams, be it social media teams, localization teams, channel marketers, digital marketers, what have you, and who then take these templates and are able to themselves generate all the different variations needed for their particular application. If needed, a review cycle is incorporated so that the creative teams, the brand teams can approve what gets created and ensure brand consistency. And then execution happens. So not only does this kind of relieve the burden on creating a lot of the volume from the core creative team, it also actually gets some of the creation process closer to execution. So you get some better agility by having channel teams, digital teams, able to create some of these variations themselves. Perhaps a real world example would help here. So many of you will be familiar with Schroders, the London-based financial asset management firm. Big company, active in over 30 countries. And they, like many of us, were challenged to effectively use social media as a marketing channel across all of these geographies that they operate in. So, when they originally were doing this, you can see, as illustrated on the left, some of the work there. It wasn't as the creative wasn't as strong as they wanted. It wasn't as consistent or as effective as they desired. Say they moved to a model of having the central creative team creating templates that you can see on the right, that then the local regional marketers were able to populate with copy, select images, things like that, and execute locally. And this proved far more effective, as you can see in their own words. This was content at scale that was also on brand. And it freed the creative team to give them more time to be creative. And I think actually this, I believe Schroders won an industry award for best use of social media with this campaign. So that's solving the content crunch by sharing the burden, if you will. The other way we're going to solve this content crunch is through automating some of creative asset creation. So this works by, again, starts with designers. Instead of creating fully finished products to go downstream to execution, again, they're creating templates. Instead of, though, sharing these templates with the rest of the marketing team, they're connecting to data sources. For example, in a localization use case, a spreadsheet that contains the localized copy for all the different languages needed. The data sources work with the templates, and then creative automation software then generates automatically all these different variations, which then go downstream for campaign execution. Let me again illustrate maybe with a customer example. So we have an airline customer who has a neat dynamic video remarketing use case. Their objective is to get visitors back to the booking site using insights from their online behavior. And the vehicle for doing this is a set of personalized video ads that are based on the destination of interest that they got through the browsing behavior. So for example, some of the components are video footage of, say, the New York City skyline, right? If they had looked at traveling to New York, or maybe the Eye of London if they had looked at traveling to London. So they have these creative assets, and then the other the data sources that are connected to are, one, behavioral data, where did they search, and secondly, pricing. Any of you who've, which is pretty much all of you, who've searched back in the day for airline prices, day to day the price changes. Airlines have incredibly sophisticated dynamic pricing algorithms, and so each day the price changed. So our customer every night generated a video ad inventory of over 800 videos, updated with daily pricing that they could then serve to customers that are relevant and have a very personalized, accurate campaign. And this level of personalization with video is clearly impossible without automation. So hopefully that example kind of fleshes out the concept of automation. So there's a lot of benefits if we can solve this content crunch. As I just mentioned, not least of which is better marketing results by really enabling effective personalization, by being able to match the volume of personalization execution with personalized assets. A secondary benefit is agility. By having more automated creative, by distributing creative down closer to execution, we'll get faster time to market. And this is especially critical these days as in these unprecedented times, as it seems the marketing environment changes so rapidly, the ability to get fresh content to market faster is more critical than it's ever been. And then thirdly, creative automation holds a promise of freeing up time of the creative teams away from cranking out to meet volume needs and having time available for storytelling, brand building. That's the third the benefit that we see. Now, as we start this journey, it's relatively creative automation, content at scale is happening as evidenced by the customer examples, but we're early in this journey. And it occurred to me, as we were thinking this through, that industries have gone through a similar journey already. And perhaps there's lessons for how this might play out from those industries. One in particular is design for manufacturing. And this happened back in the 60s and 70s, started then and really is only now come fully to fruition. But it was driven by a need for product designers and the businesses they worked for to reduce costs, to have faster time to market. And basically what happened is the upfront design work, the sketching of automobiles, the initial designs, the concepts, became in part driven by the needs of the rest of the process, the engineering and the manufacturing processes. And it became much more effective overall. They succeeded in cutting the time it takes to bring a car, for example, to market down to as fast as 2 years. Cost about 70 to 80% of the cost, it's thought, actually comes from decisions made at the design phase. So this worked out. It's really revolutionized manufacturing. But I think maybe there's some interesting parallels here and some things that might tell us about that may unfold as we look to automate some of the marketing creativity. One is that in the design for manufacturing journey, a lot of it was driven by standardization became very important. Standardization of things within firms and then actually across supply chains and the industry. Another thing that characterized design for manufacturing was the reuse of components. Being able to use the same gear shift knob in one model versus another. A lot of the time to market and cost savings came from that, but the design changed in order to accommodate that. Another interesting thing that came from design for manufacturing was a big increase in the quality of the finished product. In the case of automobiles, cars that didn't break down as much. And I wonder what might be the analog here in marketing creativity. And perhaps it's stronger brand consistency, stronger brand consistency. Perhaps that's the analog of the higher quality that came from design for manufacture. And then a fourth thing that changed is the job of the designers changed. They ended up having to be conscious of the entire process up front in their design work. And I think that same thing will end up happening potentially here with marketing design. So how might that look? I think the evolution might happen, away from designers focusing on the finished asset as a unitary whole and moving that downstream. but instead driven by an understanding of how these assets become variations and sets of assets to feed campaign execution. I think design may evolve to be more focused on, instead of single assets, scalable kits of components, if you will, and that finished asset can really be broken down across three axes, if you will. So one is the content that goes into each asset, the images, the exact videos, the exact copy. That's kind of a dimension. And a second dimension is the structure of the asset. So whether or not it's, something that fits a horizontal screen versus a vertical screen, for example. And then the finished asset could be broken into a third dimension, which is the styling, the branding, the themes. So the colors involved, the fonts, etc. So I think this may be one way that the design job could change to fit the overall automation of the entire marketing process. So a bit more speculative, I admit, but I think it's something that we're seeing already starting to happen, and we'll see how that plays out. I don't know if that's exactly how it'll play out, but it's going to be a fun journey. And I do think as we are able to achieve content at scale through creative automation, that this will go a long way to restoring balance within marketing and overcoming some of the challenges that we see today. And I'm sure it will provide a space for even more neat, creative, just brilliant things that are going to blow our socks off. I'm really looking forward to it. I appreciate your tuning in, and I can't wait to engage in the conversation about this. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, it was fantastic to watch it as well, too. And live we have now Andrew. Hello. Has everything gone okay in the technology? You can hear me?
Very good, Andrew.
I can hear you.
Wish I could be there in person.
It's Amsterdam's still a great place, I have to be honest, but hopefully we'll have you back next year then. Well, like I said, super inspiring to hear. Let me just jump right into it. You talked about the changing job sort of the creative professionals. I'm wondering, does that turn into a change in typical skill set for your average creative professionals as well?
I would expect so. If you think back to that previous example of design for manufacturing, designers had to become familiar with elements of engineering, design envelopes that they had to incorporate when, for example, sketching out a new car design. So it definitely did have some impact on the role of designers. I would imagine that here, and if we look at customers who are early in this journey, some of the early adopters, if you will, one of the big things is, well, first of all, brands typically turn to agencies to help them navigate change and adopt new things. So we see brands continue to work with agencies, but the agency deliverable becomes different. Instead of just a finished video or creative, it's important that the source files be conveyed to the brand so that they can be used downstream in this kind of automated creation of variations that I described. So some change we see definitely.
And what about the relationship between the agencies and the brands themselves? Will that change because of this?
As I mentioned, I think brands will turn to their agencies, right, and to help adopt and use these new tools. We saw this definitely happen, right, a couple decades ago when automation first appeared on the execution side. I myself can remember using numerous brands to help adopt marketing automation, run marketing automation, deal with floods of data. And today, very few brands aren't leveraging specialized technical talent within agencies for real-time ad networks and things like that. So I think this is definitely a space, new technology, where brands absolutely will be looking for agencies to help them. Again, I think what may change is that it'll be less of a waterfall process, less agency creates final thing and then just kind of throws it over the fence to brand execution. Instead, it'll be, more of a maybe kind of a circular process, and the deliverables from agency to client will change to better fit this downstream creation of variation.
But any change in the power relationship as well? Or, I mean, I understand that does it make anyone more, does the power relationship change in this new world order?
I don't think so. I think that as long as agencies use the technology to deliver more for a given cost, instead of using the technology to try and maintain, kind of a price per project, a price per deliverable, if you will, yet use the automation to greatly reduce their own costs. Economics shows that when the cost of things goes down, the use and consumption goes up. And I see no reason why that won't happen with creative output. If the cost goes down because we can automate more of it, brands will simply use more of it. So I don't think there'll be a fundamental change in power dynamic. That's my prediction.
That makes sense. I've got a question from the internet here. If the ROI of personalization is free falling, does it mean that we are going to witness a new era in digital advertising? And what might that look like?
Well, I don't know that
outside of the automation that you spoke about.
Yeah, I don't know that ROI is free falling. Again, I would say gets more and more challenging to get more ROI from the platform, and that ROI is one headwind. But you could make a good argument that the legislation happening and the changes that are happening to the ad technology itself, the loss of the loss of tracking, both online and via mobile, that's going to have profound implications. Now, what that may mean, I would hope is that means we have less of this just raw product promotion ubiquity, and that instead we get more of a brand story, more creativity involved in advertising. So, for example, instead of just using the insight that a consumer put an athletic shoe in the shopping cart to hound that consumer with that shoe across the internet, maybe do something with the insight provided by the fact that was an athletic shoe that they put into their cart. What does it tell you about that consumer? What ways can you then connect your brand to them based on that interest of theirs?
Ooh,
I'd like to see it go in that direction, hopefully.
That would be an exciting future, because if you think about the present, we don't even know if you bought the Hawaiian shirt. I mean, even, that I think would stop some of that creepy feeling. It's like, I bought the shirt. Stop feeding me the advertisement. Okay.
Andrew, if I went and showed you the Hawaiian shirt, you think there's any chance I'd stop getting those advertisements?
Listen, we can do a lot, but we can't stop those things from following you. I think you know that more than anybody. Okay, thank you very much for the talk and for the presentation, and hopefully next year in person.
I hope so, Andrew.
Perfect.